Brooke Wilson had always been the quiet one in the family. The younger sister who preferred observing tide pools to attending high school parties. The one who kept field journals filled with careful sketches of native plant species while her older brother Theo dominated dinner conversations with stories of his social conquests and career ambitions. Now, at 32, not much had changed. She still preferred the company of water ecosystems to people. The difference was that she had built a life and career around this preference, even if few in her family understood the value of her work. "So you're still with that little tree group?" Theo asked, swirling his bourbon as they stood in their parents' backyard. "Horizon Restoration isn't little," Brooke replied. "We've expanded to 3 states now." "That's nice," Theo said, his attention already wandering to a group of family friends by the grill. At 35, her brother had climbed the corporate ladder with remarkable speed, now serving as marketing director at Tech Future, one of the country's fastest-growing tech companies. "We're actually working on a major wetland restoration project that could significantly impact—" "Hold that thought," Theo interrupted, placing his empty glass on a nearby table. "I see the Andersons just arrived. Dad's been trying to get Mr. Anderson to invest in his new venture." As Theo hustled away, Brooke sighed. It wasn't that her brother was unkind, he'd always been protective and generous in his way. It was more that he'd never seen her as an equal. In his world, success had a very specific shape: corporate titles, 6-figure salaries, and the ability to command attention in any room. Her phone buzzed with a text from her colleague Zane. "Just got approval for the East Side project. 5 acres of urban green space coming to the community." Brooke smiled. This was what mattered: actual, tangible change. Yet she couldn't help but wish her family understood the significance of her work. Particularly Theo, whose approval she had sought since childhood. Later that evening, as the family gathering transitioned from backyard barbecue to a more formal dinner celebration of their parents' 40th anniversary, Brooke found herself seated between her cousin Ellie and her Aunt Patricia. "Brooke, dear, are you still working with plants?" Aunt Patricia asked, passing the salad bowl. "Environmental science, Aunt Patricia. I lead restoration projects." "Oh, that's nice." "Very earthy. Though I always thought you had a good head for numbers. Your father says you were always so clever with puzzles." Across the table, Theo was holding court, describing Tech Future's latest marketing campaign to an enraptured audience. "We completely revolutionized the approach," he was saying. "Instead of traditional demographic targeting, we developed a proprietary algorithm that predicts consumer behavior based on—" "That sounds fascinating, Theo," their mother interrupted, beaming with pride. "You've always had such a gift for explaining complex ideas." Theo nodded modestly. "It's all about communication. Being able to translate technical concepts into language that resonates with people." Speaking of communication, their father chimed in, "Weren't you planning to take that public speaking masterclass? The one with that famous guy. What was his name?" "Julian Mercer," Theo supplied. "The Influence Accelerator program. It's incredibly selective, only accepts 40 professionals each cohort from thousands of applicants." Brooke paused, her fork halfway to her mouth. She'd heard about this program before. Many times, in fact. For the past 3 years, Theo had mentioned it at nearly every family gathering, how transformative it would be for his career, how the alumni network included CEOs and political leaders, how he was planning to apply when the timing was right. "You should do it, son," their father encouraged. "Sounds right up your alley." "I've been meaning to," Theo replied. "It's just finding the time, with the new product launch and everything. Maybe next year." Brooke took a sip of water, an idea forming in her mind. In her field, effective communication wasn't just an asset, it was desperately needed. Environmental science was full of brilliant researchers who couldn't translate their findings into language that moved people to action. What if? 3 weeks later, Brooke sat in her modest apartment, staring at her laptop screen. The Influence Accelerator application was open before her. The program's website featured testimonials from past participants, corporate executives, startup founders, and policy experts who had used the program's techniques to advance their careers and causes. None of them were environmental scientists. The 6-month program wasn't cheap, and it would require significant time commitment on evenings and weekends. But something about Theo's dismissal of her work had ignited a determination she hadn't felt in years. Personal statement, 500 words maximum. Please explain why you wish to join the Influence Accelerator program and how you intend to apply the skills in your professional context. Brooke began typing. The most urgent crisis of our time is being lost in translation. As an environmental scientist specializing in ecosystem restoration, I witness daily how critical research and solutions fail to gain traction, not because they lack merit, but because they lack effective messengers. She wrote about the gap between scientific understanding and public policy. About how restoration projects with demonstrated economic and social benefits were regularly overlooked for funding. About how the environmental field needed voices that could speak to diverse audiences without diluting scientific integrity. When she finished, she read her statement 3 times, making small adjustments. Then, before she could reconsider, she clicked submit. "You did what?" Zane asked, nearly spilling her coffee across the meeting room table. "I applied to the Influence Accelerator program," Brooke repeated, as she sorted soil sample reports. "Isn't that the fancy leadership thing your brother's been talking about forever but never actually does?" "The very one." Zane grinned. "That's deliciously petty." "I love it." "It's not about Theo," Brooke protested, though they both knew this wasn't entirely true. "It's about developing skills we need. You know how frustrated we've been trying to get city officials to understand the importance of the downtown watershed project." Zane's skepticism was evident. "And the fact that you'll be able to casually mention completing the program your big brother only talks about has nothing to do with it?" Brooke allowed herself a small smile. "That would just be a side benefit." The acceptance email came on a Tuesday morning. Brooke had to read it 3 times before she believed it. "Dear Ms. Wilson, we are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted into the fall 2024 cohort of the Influence Accelerator program. Your application stood out for its compelling vision of applying communication techniques to environmental advocacy. Only 38 participants had been selected from over 2,000 applicants." The email included a personal note from Julian Mercer himself, expressing interest in her work on urban ecosystem restoration. She immediately texted Zane, "I got in." The reply came seconds later, "What? That's amazing. Does Theo know yet?" "No one in my family knows I applied." "This is going to be epic," Zane texted back. For the next 6 months, Brooke lived a double life. By day, she led Horizon Restoration's projects, working with community volunteers and partner organizations to rehabilitate damaged ecosystems. Evenings and weekends were devoted to the Influence Accelerator program. The cohort met twice weekly, once virtually and once in person at the program's downtown headquarters. Among the tech executives and aspiring politicians, Brooke initially felt out of place. But as the weeks progressed, she discovered an unexpected aptitude for the program's core skills: storytelling, persuasive communication, media engagement, and leadership presence. Julian Mercer, the program's founder, took a particular interest in her work. "Environmental science has some of the most compelling stories waiting to be told," he told her after one session. "You're not just restoring ecosystems, you're restoring humanity's connection to the natural world. That's a powerful narrative." Brooke absorbed everything: how to craft statistics into stories, how to read a room, how to use body language and voice modulation for maximum impact. She applied these techniques immediately, securing a meeting with the City Planning Commission to present Horizon's proposal for the downtown watershed restoration. When the commission unanimously approved the project and allocated twice the funding she'd requested, Brooke knew something fundamental had shifted. Meanwhile, at family gatherings, she said nothing about the program. When Theo mentioned it again at their mother's birthday dinner, "I'm thinking of finally doing that Influence Accelerator thing this year," she simply nodded and passed the potatoes. By the final month of the program, Brooke had been selected as one of 5 participants to deliver a showcase presentation to an audience of community leaders, potential investors, and program alumni. The event would coincide, almost perfectly, with her parents' annual summer party, a tradition that had evolved from family barbecue to sophisticated networking event as their father's real estate business had grown. She had managed to keep her participation in the program secret from her family, no small feat given how the Influence Accelerator had transformed her professional life. Horizon Restoration had secured 3 major grants, launched a successful public awareness campaign, and been featured in the Regional Business Journal, all direct results of her enhanced communication skills. As she prepared her showcase presentation on translating environmental science into community action, Brooke received an unexpected email from Julian Mercer. Brooke, I've been invited to your parents' summer gathering by Richard Anderson, who I understand is a friend of your father's. Small world. Looking forward to seeing you in both contexts. I promise to follow your lead regarding your program participation. Best, Julian. Brooke stared at the screen. Richard Anderson, of course. The venture capitalist who had been her father's golf buddy for years. She hadn't made the connection that he was the same Anderson who sat on the Influence Accelerator's advisory board. The timing was either disastrous or perfect, depending on how she looked at it. The day of her parents' summer party arrived with perfect blue skies and a gentle breeze, ideal weather for an outdoor gathering. Brooke arrived early to help set up, wearing a simple emerald dress that complemented her eyes, a confidence-building technique she'd learned from the program session on nonverbal communication. You look different, her mother observed, arranging flower centerpieces on the outdoor tables. New dress, Brooke replied. No, it's not that. You seem more present, somehow. Before Brooke could respond, Theo arrived with his new girlfriend, a stylish marketing executive he'd been dating for 3 months. He greeted their mother with his customary charm before turning to Brooke. Hey, little sis. How's the plant business? 6 months ago, the dismissive phrasing would have irritated her. Now, she simply smiled. Thriving, actually. How's the tech world? Crushing it. We just landed the Westfield account, biggest client of the quarter. That's great, Theo. He studied her for a moment. You seem different. You're the second person to say that today. The party gradually filled with family friends, business associates, and neighbors. Brooke moved through the crowd with an ease that would have been foreign to her a year earlier, engaging in conversations about the local economy, community development, and yes, ecosystem restoration. She was discussing the economic benefits of urban green spaces with one of her father's colleagues when she spotted Julian Mercer entering the garden. Despite his celebrity status in professional development circles, Julian had a modest presence, thoughtful eyes behind stylish glasses, more listener than speaker. He caught her gaze and gave a small nod, allowing her to take the lead on how to handle the situation. Before she could decide, Theo appeared at Julian's side, hand extended in greeting. Mr. Mercer. What a surprise. I'm Theo Wilson, we've exchanged emails about the Influence Accelerator program. Julian shook his hand warmly. Ah, yes. Theo. From Tech Future, correct? That's right. I've been following your work for years. In fact, I'm planning to apply for your next cohort. Wonderful. Always good to meet an admirer. Julian's eyes twinkled with amusement as he glanced at Brooke. Their father joined the conversation, clapping a hand on Theo's shoulder. Julian. Glad you could make it. I see you've met my son. He's been talking about your program for ages, says it's the best leadership training in the country. It's certainly challenging, Julian replied diplomatically. Theo's always been our family communicator, their father continued proudly. Even as a kid, he could talk his way into or out of anything. More guests gravitated toward their circle, drawn by Julian's presence. Brooke watched as Theo effortlessly positioned himself at the center of the conversation, explaining to everyone how the Influence Accelerator was the gold standard of leadership development. The application process is incredibly selective, he was saying. They only take the top professionals in each field. That's true, Julian acknowledged. In fact, our current cohort had an acceptance rate of less than 2%. I'm hoping to join the winter cohort, Theo continued. Once our current product launch settles down. Julian nodded. We do get many applications from the tech sector, but what's been most exciting about this current group is the diversity of fields represented. We have participants from healthcare, education, government. He paused, his gaze finding Brooke in the circle. And environmental science. A brief silence fell over the group. Theo followed Julian's gaze to his sister, confusion evident on his face. Environmental science, their father asked. Like what Brooke does? Exactly like what Brooke does, Julian confirmed. In fact. Julian, Brooke interrupted, stepping forward. I'd love your thoughts on the urban watershed initiative we discussed last week. Dad, you'd be interested in this too. It involves that downtown area you were considering for development. The deflection worked momentarily, steering the conversation toward urban planning. But as Julian described the watershed project in detail, praising its innovative approach to combining ecosystem restoration with economic revitalization, Theo's confusion deepened. How do you know so much about my sister's work? He finally asked. Julian glanced at Brooke, silently asking permission. She gave a slight nod. I've had the pleasure of mentoring Brooke for the past 6 months as part of our current Influence Accelerator cohort, Julian explained. She's actually one of our standout participants. The revelation landed like a stone in still water, ripples of surprise moving through the gathering. All eyes turned to Brooke. You're in the Influence Accelerator program? Theo asked, disbelief evident in his voice. Since when? Since September, Brooke replied calmly. I graduate next week. Actually, Julian, did you bring those brochures for the alumni network? My colleague Zane might be interested in applying for the next cohort. Julian, clearly enjoying the moment, produced a glossy brochure from his jacket pocket. Of course. You know, Brooke's final presentation on communicating environmental science to diverse stakeholders is being developed into a TED Talk. We've never had a participants showcase project gain that kind of traction before. Their father stared at Brooke as if seeing her for the first time. A TED Talk? Our Brooke? Yes, your Brooke, Julian confirmed. She's revolutionizing how environmental scientists communicate complex ideas to the public. The downtown watershed project she mentioned? The mayor's office has adopted it as a model for future urban development throughout the city. I had no idea, their mother said softly, pride evident in her voice. Theo stood silent, processing. Brooke met his gaze steadily, neither apologetic nor triumphant. Finally, he spoke. Why didn't you tell us? Brooke considered her answer carefully, applying the authentic communication techniques she'd learned. I wanted to prove something to myself first, that I could do it. That my work matters. Of course your work matters, their father interjected. Does it? Because for years, whenever I've tried to talk about it, the conversation changes. Or someone asks when I'll get a real job. Or my brother dismisses it as the plant business. Theo had the grace to look embarrassed. I didn't mean. I know, Brooke interrupted, gentler now. But intention and impact are different things. A thoughtful silence fell over the group. Julian, skilled facilitator that he was, sensed the family needed space. I should greet some other guests, he said tactfully. Brooke, perhaps you could introduce me to your parents' friends who work in local government? I'd love to hear more about the city's sustainability initiatives. As Julian and Brooke moved away, Theo remained rooted in place, watching his sister navigate the party with newfound confidence. She introduced Julian to key community figures, facilitated conversations between people with shared interests, and spoke about her work with quiet authority. Later, as the party wound down, Theo found Brooke alone by their mother's rose trellis. That was quite the revelation, he said, hands in his pockets. It wasn't planned this way, she replied. Julian being here was coincidence. But you applying to the program wasn't. A small smile played at the corner of her mouth. No, that was deliberate. Because I talked about it but never did it? Partially, she admitted. But mostly because I needed those skills. Environmental science has a communication problem. We know what needs to be done to address climate change, habitat loss, pollution, but we struggle to translate that knowledge into action. Theo nodded slowly. And now you've been invited to give a TED Talk. Life has unexpected turns. I'm proud of you, he said finally. And maybe a little jealous. You could still apply. And follow in my little sister's footsteps? He laughed, a genuine sound free of malice. Actually, that doesn't sound so bad anymore. They stood in companionable silence, watching the last guests depart. Something had shifted between them, a rebalancing that had been years in the making. So, Theo said eventually, tell me about this watershed project. For real this time. Brooke smiled and began to speak, using all the skills she had learned to explain complex environmental science in a way that even her marketing-minded brother could appreciate. And for the first time in their adult lives, Theo listened, really listened, as if his sister might have something valuable to teach him after all.